Good morning, everyone. Apologize. Tied up in another meeting. All right. We waiting for anybody? Or we can go ahead and get started.
Hey, Colin, Scott Strain said he's coming out of another meeting and he'll join us shortly.
Okay. So we can go ahead and get started then. See if I can jot down some notes. One of the things, I was talking to Lloyd's out this week, so he asked me to sort of fill in for him. So I'm kind of pinch hitting, and one of the things that he said we need to sort of talk through and get some ideas on is specifically about how we might use data to improve our outreach to unsheltered individuals. So with that, I will open up the floor to discussion, ideas, thoughts on how we might wish to do that. Don't everybody speak at once. Or if there's other things that people have read and would like to share or talk about in the application that's been sent out, we can talk about that as well. Or we can just not meet.
Hey, I did have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When it comes to street outreach, and this is just for my personal notes, when it comes to street outreach, what exactly is all included in that? Where's our playground area for street outreach?
All of Durham.
Okay, but like, what kind of,
Activities.
yeah, what kind of activities?
So there's a whole section in the CFR. I can see if I can pull that up. Hold on. Case management, supportive services. There's a whole lot of stuff. I'd have to pull the
If you have a document that I can just reference, I can totally read it on my own.
yeah, that's what I'll have to find it.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah, I just can't put my fingers on it like quickly and easily.
No worries.
Colin,
No worries.
Colin, are you referring to 24 CFR 578 and the list for supportive services?
That's probably where it is.
Okay.
Because there's street outreach for the CoC is different than the ESG street outreach piece.
Right.
So that's the piece that it sort of depends on your funding source.
Got it.
yeah,
Each funding
it's,
source has slightly different rules and regulations, and for the
Got it.
CoC,
Okay.
it falls under the supportive services. For ESG, there's a specific section for support for street outreach, and then
Okay.
it sort of overlaps with some other pieces.
Okay.
Because-
Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ricky. Ricky, the CFR rememberer. I just can't, I can never, I'm bouncing back and forth between so many CFRs. I can never remember which number goes to which program.
yeah, no worries.
So appreciate the help on that. All right. If you just, Shay, if you just Google 24 CFR 578.53, it should pop up. And there's probably, you can also go to the ecfr.gov. And I think Cornell has a version of it as well. Cornell Law.
Thank you so much.
Yep. That should help you out. All right. So talk about street outreach and how we might use some data to try and track folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness to target resources. And as much as we have that love-hate relationship with data, sometimes it does help to have information in one place. Thoughts on, and I know the street outreach teams currently collect data and are entering client data into the HMIS, correct? I think Ricky, you might be the only representative of the street
Yeah.
from here.
I was looking to see if anybody from Open Tables,
Yeah, they're not.
but I don't believe so. So like this actually comes at a really, I'm gonna say favorable time,
Mhm.
because we're coming into federal reporting season, everyone's favorite,
Mhm.
for system performance measures and the longitudinal system analysis, right?
Mhm.
So NCCEH, the data center, just sent out an email. Can't remember if it was like yesterday or Wednesday, but they're doing upcoming training on street outreach data of engagement reporting. And I think that's happening on October 4th. And so perhaps during that meeting with the data center, we can hopefully glean some information about like what does Durham's data of engagement reporting look like currently. And for those on the call who aren't as familiar, date of engagement for street outreach is when a person decides that they want to receive services, like they're willing to be a part of the program, if you will, to either enter into shelter or potentially enter into permanent housing without a shelter stay. Everything before the date of engagement is just like contacts with the person. So maybe dropping off hygiene products or, things to help make living outside a little easier, but it doesn't count as like officially working with the client or person rather, until there is a date of engagement.
So do you only enter a date of engagement when somebody agrees to kind of meet with you a second time? Or is a date of engagement entered the first time you meet with somebody?
No, date of engagement is entered when the person is willing to do the project entry assessment entirely. So like that's when they're bought into the idea of hopefully no longer living outside.
Okay.
That's when the date of engagement
Got
gets
it.
entered. Everything else before that is just a contact.
Okay. So then, do you know, Ricky, because I haven't had time to look at it. So all right, so you're collecting contact information. So if I'm experiencing unsheltered homelessness and Ricky, the street outreach case manager, meets with me, Colin, 25 times in 3 months, that gets entered in the HMIS as a contact. And
Correct.
then on meeting number 26, I finally say, okay, fine, I'll answer all of your questions. Then that becomes my date of engagement, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So then in theory, we should be able to run a report out of HMIS to try and figure out how long or how many contacts it takes before people get to a date of engagement.
Yes.
Okay. And then we could figure out how to see if we can figure out how long it takes from date of engagement to the time somebody exits unsheltered homelessness which would be to either emergency shelter or permanent housing or temporary.
Correct.
housing.
Well, yeah, exactly. Any type of not living outside
Right.
option is like a positive exit, whether that's shelter or temporary or permanent housing.
And some people potentially could even skip a date of engagement and go straight from contacts into exiting unsheltered homelessness.
Nope. So if on that first contact, the person is bought in and, wants to do it and is willing to, do the project entry assessment, the contact date and the date of engagement date will be the same, but you have to have a date of engagement.
Right, but you can't do a date of engagement if somebody doesn't want to answer all the questions, right?
Correct.
But what I was suggesting is if I have 15 contacts with you and I never answer your questions, but then on the 16th contact, you're like, oh yeah, I found a place to go live. I'm going to go stay with my cousin. I could exit unsheltered homelessness without ever having a date of engagement because I refuse to answer the questions.
In theory, yes. I haven't seen that in practice, but yes, that potentially could happen.
Could happen. Okay. Yeah, I'm not saying it would happen. I'm just saying like on paper, it could happen. A self-resolution of, like a first-time homeless or something like that. Or
But I do think that's a good view to maybe capture so that, you have it on record that you've engaged with this person 15 to 16 times. And even though they didn't do the initial engagement, they still were able to find additional housing that we can update in the system, like, self-found or utilize resources outside of this program or something like that. I do think that'll be a good data set to capture. So it kind of tells you who you're talking to, how long you've talked to them, and what was the result. Did we help them, or did they help themselves by some of the resources that we were able to provide them during the initial contact?
So Shay, we wouldn't be able to get anything like that out of HMIS. Like that would be something that would have to be like intentionally tracked elsewhere. I think the way that HMIS is currently set up is to try to figure out how many contacts does it take to get to a date of engagement. Like that's just how the software is written.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, you do raise an excellent point. It would just be something that would have to be manually tracked, and that would be very time consuming. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Okay, no worries. Just thinking out loud.
No, it's a great thought. Like, wish it were available.
well,
Gotcha.
I think the only way you wouldn't be clean, but we could maybe talk to the data center, is you essentially would have kind of an HMIS project for the contacts and then an engagement project. So anybody who exited prior to an engagement being completed would be captured one way in the HMIS, and people who are post-engagement, but then you lose all that contact data when you enter them into a new contract, unless we set it up that those records pull over.
The idea of the deduplication that would involve, Colin, I'm not your girl. It would be a lot.
No, but although we potentially could create a reporting group that would bundle the two projects together, and you could run a report to deduplicate if they kind of followed the same, like APR quest, like the same, essentially, for lack of a better term, like if they all had the same data fields, you could run a report that would deduplicate. I think if you made them a reporting group, and as long as all the pieces came together. I don't know.
It's a good idea.
It would be an NCCH question to figure out, is it possible?
Yeah.
part of me likes to think it must be possible because we deduplicate a ton of data for the LSA. Because there's a whole lot of people who go in and out of all of these programs multiple times in a year and have to be deduplicated because they were in street outreach, then they were in coordinated entry, then they were in family shelter at Urban Ministries and family shelter at Families Moving Forward, then they were in rapid rehousing, then they were in PSH, then they were in, and somehow we're able to deduplicate that past all those programs to find out that that one family was not actually 17 families. Okay, so if we're going to be collecting data on contacts, and then we're going to be collecting data on date of engagement, then we would maybe run those reports on a, what do you think, Ricky, a quarterly basis and kind of see how people are moving and maybe use those reports to help target specific households? Because if we were able to run it, let's say on an APR, you could say, oh, here are people who have had 20 contacts, and we could really kind of focus trying to get them to engagement. On the people who have had, 10 to 20 contacts are the ones we should be focusing for engagement right now.
Yeah, I think quarterly would be good, just based on our current shelter capacity, as well as capacity in our PSH and rapid rehousing projects. I think anything more frequent than quarterly, we would just kind of be spinning our wheels, but taking a look every 90 days to see what movement there has been, I think would be more beneficial.
Okay. Okay. So quarterly data pulls to try and identify folks. And then use it looking at dates of engagement, and then try and shorten the, as a long-term goal, looking at the goal of reducing the length of time from date of engagement to date of exiting unsheltered homelessness would be another good data goal.
Repeat that one more time, Colin.
So looking at date of engagement and date exiting unsheltered homelessness. Let's say we find, the first quarter, it's a 90 days because nobody exited during that 90 days. And the second quarter, we're at 120 days is the length of time on average it takes from date of engagement to the date somebody exits unsheltered homelessness. Looking at that data and trying to figure out what can we do to try and shorten that length of time that people are experiencing unsheltered homelessness if we're finding that from the date of engagement to the date they actually exit unsheltered homelessness, we want to get that as short as possible.
Yeah, I think I think tying it into our systems coordinated entry practices would be helpful here. Like, we can mention the perks of the UCA program, which is the flexibility to help with housing plans that the individual may have on their own. Like maybe, they've got family in another state and the outreach caseworkers were able to help that person, reconnect with family, maybe mediate, a tenuous relationship, and they're able to, go back to that state, but they don't have the money. Like, UCA would be able to help provide funds to actualize that plan. And so I think we could talk about that, but then also maybe want to talk about how coordinated entry also has diversion funds to help people. But I don't know if their diversion is set up more for like prevention or if it's for like people who are actually homeless now. That's something I don't know. So I would love an explanation on what they do there.
But you can't divert somebody from homelessness who's already homeless.
Yes.
So
Yes.
by definition, that's impossible to do. But there is a pot of money that would allow you to exit somebody from homelessness to permanent housing, if that were to become available. Go ahead, Lee has his hand up.
Good morning, everyone. I guess I was trying to catch up on some of the reading. I was brought in just a little while ago this morning, so I'm trying to catch up on some of the reading and the goals of this. I guess one of the questions I was having was, coordinated entry. They do diversion of funds for unsheltered applicants. They try to provide some additional support, either with a relative, friend, couch surfing, all the above to help. Because the shelter system is so kind of like in a backlog, because we don't have affordable housing in this area. That's been the toughest issue, is that the system is not moving fluently because we can't get people affordable housing. Thus, the average stay at the shelter has like tripled when it was maybe 30 days or 45 days. So I guess I'm trying to figure out where would our focus be with this, I guess, the federal grant.
So this particular grant is specifically targeted to the unsheltered people facing unsheltered homelessness and trying to reduce the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness through getting connected to mainstream resources, to shelters, to permanent housing in whatever way you can, to sort of try and make sure we've got people engaging with them and getting connected to resources. But you're absolutely right, Lee. It's impossible to exit people from homelessness when you don't have units to put people in, or landlords who are willing to rent to the folks that we're trying to exit. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, this is sort of and some of these funds could be used to expand like PSH, permanent supportive housing. So you could use these funds to bring more permanent supportive housing online. We're also looking at trying to leverage other housing around. So, our department is looking at, okay, what commitments can we make with RFPs that will be coming up in the future that, X percent or X number of units could be earmarked as a priority for people exiting unsheltered homelessness, because this particular pot of funds could pay for the supportive services. And if we could pay for the supportive services, then we just have to figure out how do we pay for the rent in these units if we get them targeted. And that could be housing choice vouchers. It could be, reduced rent. It could, any number of ways to cover that. So we're trying to bring everything we can to the table that we can leverage as best we can.
Colin,
Yes.
legit question. How does it provide supportive services for PSH when PSH is supposed to provide supportive services?
If you applied for I don't think anybody applied for this for a PSH program.
Okay.
But you could apply for a PSH program, and a PSH program would allow you to do outreach services. So
Gotcha.
you could kind of have both, where you're doing outreach and the supportive services in a PSH program.
Okay. Sharita, I think the answer to your question might be the life of the grant. Like if it were funded, it would cover it for as long as the grant is funded by HUD. And so if Durham were to be awarded, the initial grant is 3 years, which is awesome. That's exciting because usually grant terms are 1 year.
Yeah, and it's potentially renewable. Well, when the funds run out, then the funds run out, but HUD is kind of recognizing that these projects will probably need to be renewed, and they've said that they are able to potentially be renewed. I don't think they've committed 100% to that, but the plan would be that they would be renewable during the normal NOFO competition as part of the plan. But it also may mean that at some point, if there's not enough money, then communities will have to pick and choose what gets funded, what doesn't get funded.
Yeah. I don't think necessarily anybody would return to homelessness, Sharita. Like the hope is that this program is if it gets awarded, would be connecting people to permanent housing opportunities, like Colin said, whether that's PSH or targeted key or, some sort of rental subsidy that's helping these folks. And so like, try to think of it as almost this project being like a warm transfer to permanent housing. As far as staffing, if the project did get awarded and HUD were to decide after 3 years, we don't have the money to continue doing this, hopefully there would be enough advance notice for the community to respond and see how positions might be able to be absorbed elsewhere. But I think it would have to be like a community decision, like an HSAC decision about how we want to try to preserve as much of this project as we could.
Yeah, and in terms of SOAR workers, I don't know. I haven't read all the applications and not sure that I don't know the details of who applied for what or what the projects look like. I haven't had the capacity to read them.
H&H put in for 2 SOAR workers in our budget.
So that brings 2. And then would they be exclusively SOAR workers, or would that be part of their job?
They would be exclusively SOAR.
Okay. So there you go. 2 exclusive SOAR workers in the H&H budget.
So Sharita will have friends. She won't be alone.
And then the H&H project, I believe, is supportive services only. Is that right? Or did you do it as a PSH, Ricky?
Nope, supportive services only.
Okay.
Because we're expanding, or
Hoping
prayerfully,
to expand PSH.
prayerfully we're expanding our PSH.
Got it.
Everybody light a candle for that. Pray, do a rosary, whatever you do, meditate. Please pray that our PSH projects get expanded.
Okay.
So that would be a data point, disability benefits obtained. I'm not sure whether, I don't know which report you run. I think there is a change in income report, right?
And we consistently get dinged on it every time because, well, I think the question is more about that their income increase once they got into housing, and we consistently get dinged on that. Either people already have disability benefits and they don't like get a job, and so their income just kind of stays the same, or they don't have income.
Generally speaking, those disability benefits go up like a couple dollars every year, don't they, Sharita? Like
Not necessarily. Depends on the kindness of the federal government as to whether they go up. In recent times, we've had like 3 consistent years of it, but prior to that, it had been quite a while before there was an increase.
And that's one of the big things that if case managers, that's one of the things that just across the board, every jurisdiction I've worked in, we always forget to go in and update those tiny little things like, oh, you got an extra penny or an extra 5 cents or an extra $10 of food stamps or an extra $10 of benefits here or there. It's one of those things that often falls off the radar on those annual things to get updated because it's such a de minimis amount. And sometimes tracking down that piece of paper every year with clients who are not necessarily the best at holding on to those documents is a challenge, but it is something that we can score better on. And the more people we can get connected to disability, the better chance they have of maintaining housing because they've got some income to help cover expenses. Okay. Other thoughts?
Was there ever a response back from Lincoln and the health system on the letters of support?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I know Lloyd was handling that. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I know that Lloyd mentioned that he had at least one conversation with Claretta, but that there was some additional talks that needed to happen internally at Lincoln, and I haven't been updated on whether that has gone beyond that.
Yeah, Claretta was good. I think the last conversation I remember we had with Claretta was she was going to talk to the finance and other folks to try and figure out what's possible and what could be put together. And I've asked Rod probably 2 weeks ago if he's heard or needed anything for the folks from Duke.
And you can, was there a draft letter that was sent to Duke similar to the draft letter sent to Lincoln?
It was probably the same. There was a, I mean,
it was just an interesting, because I guess I'm, trying to understand the leveraging healthcare resources. If Lincoln's paid to provide care, what's the leveraging aspect?
So we're looking at what we're trying to do is essentially, let's use Lincoln, for example. Like Lincoln provides care to people experiencing homelessness, whether they have insurance or not. So what we're trying to do is say, we're not interested in how much money Medicaid is reimbursing you or Medicare is reimbursing you. We want to know what is the amount of charity care for people experiencing homelessness that you're not able to get reimbursed. That would be the leveraged piece of that they're contributing to unsheltered homelessness care for the piece.
I guess I'm just confused because Lincoln is a fairly qualified health center. Don't they receive federal funds as a healthcare for the homeless clinic to provide medical care?
I don't know all their.
They do, but what I do know about that process is that initially there was it was broken up and they got a separate pot for healthcare for the homeless. And maybe 3 to 5 years ago, it just got lumped into the amount. So in my mind, at this point, it will require them to track it differently, which I think is why the conversations with CFO and all of that needs to happen, because they have to figure out if they can, pull that apart, or they're willing to pull that apart and track it in a meaningful way to be able to give us numbers.
It's basically trying to say, here's the piece that isn't paid for by other sources that's coming from, from insurance. Like what's the part that is being written off every year, for lack of a better term?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Lincoln's writing, but I think that's my point is I'm not sure they're actually writing off funds, but I'm sure they'll work it out.
Yeah, we're just trying to say what we don't know. That's why we're asking the question is, everybody does some level of charity care. Duke, their emergency room, there's funds that don't, people without insurance go to the emergency room and they don't get reimbursed $50,000 for an emergency room visit. They get reimbursed some. So it's trying to figure out how much And is there a number that folks can come up with? I know we did get a letter from TROSA about sort of what their level of, commitment is to helping it. So, we're working our way through it and do what we can. And it's not an easy task, because it's one of those things that, it's a lot of data, and trying to figure out how to parse out, here's a bunch of money we don't get reimbursed every year, or it's reimbursed in this form versus Medicaid. It's from, other sources.
Right. It's not,
And
yeah, it
then
also
what
seems
percentage of
tricky.
those are experiencing homelessness. So
Mhm.
it's a lot of, number jujitsu that has to be sorted out.
Yeah, no, I think I'm just, yeah, it's also just interesting because it seems to me that the RFP is asking for sort of leveraged healthcare resources specific to the specific unsheltered clients being served by this program. And it seems like what you're trying to do is just say charity care exists. Can you quantify it? Which
And then-
seems like maybe a missed opportunity to make a specific request specific to this RFP and this client population.
And I'm probably misstating it. Lloyd's been dealing with this more, but yes, we're trying to boil it down as we're starting at the big number and saying, okay, can we contribute this tiny amount to those who
No,
are?
I know. I understand what you're saying. I just think it's a missed opportunity, but that's all. I mean, particularly when we look at something like SOAR workers and, Duke is, reevaluating their commitment to having SOAR workers. And, here would be an opportunity to say, hey,
Mhm.
this is really important to our community. We've got this opportunity, and to pursue, making an actual ask rather than just saying, can you say that you, donate care because it's uncompensated.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Sally. And we can go back and ask if they'll reinstate the SOAR workers. We were trying to figure out what we could, through the conversations that we were able to have, trying to find a way that we could do something, and what would be the easiest thing to do, because asking, Duke, Lincoln, or anybody else to start committing new resources, there just isn't enough time for all of that to go through all the decision-making channels. So we were trying to figure out what can we do to get a level of commitment that we could codify. Because as you know, trying to get through budgeting processes, legal processes, all the things you have to do to be able to get, we'll commit to a new program or continuation of a program that is up in the air, could take months, and we didn't have, a year to, 3 to 6 months to get all the details worked out. So we were trying to figure out what is it that we can commit to, and we can always adjust it as after it's awarded, if we get it awarded. We just have to get something on paper that shows that we've got a commitment from the system. And then when we go to the reporting piece, we can say, hey, this is what we said it was going to be, but it actually turned into SOAR workers instead of emergency room visits. But right now,
because
without getting anything on paper, it's going to hurt us in being able to have a competitive application. We were trying to
I was just questioning whether the commitment of emergency rooms visits would make a competitive application.
Sharita is our guru of SOAR workers. Sharita, would you share specifically what a SOAR worker is and what they do?
So a SOAR worker is a person who goes through some specific training to be able to process disability applications for clients who are homeless or at imminent risk of homelessness. They serve a lot, very similar in the role, just like an attorney would. So they sign a 1696, which gives them kind of like ownership of the claim. And, because oftentimes homeless persons don't have a place for their mail to go, don't know how to don't understand the disability process to a point where they can successfully execute it without assistance. So a store worker essentially does that, and the client is not assessed a fee. So once the benefits are awarded, if you have an attorney can get up to a third of any back pay owed on the claim. And what a store worker does is remove that. And basically they do the disability claim like an attorney and help a person get benefits. And store workers, because of the training, it's a national model. They've been able to get benefits awarded quicker for people instead of them going through like hearings and all of that because of the training they receive. I've been doing store for 11 years. It's too long. But that's what store workers do. So right now I'm it, and I'm not a full-time dedicated store worker. So it's supposed to be like a little piece of my job that ends up taking up a whole lot of time and a whole lot of nights not at work trying to get it done. But I do it anyway.
And one can imagine like the medical history, you know, that the folks that we're serving have that, and, you know, SOAR has to go through their entire medical record, you know, trying to, you know, get these necessary benefits for folks. So it's not for the faint of heart. And Sharita, thank you for continuing to do it, even though it's not supposed to be as much of your job as it is.
At this point, I'm just staving off referrals because everybody's calling me. So, and then also I get calls from communities that don't have SOAR workers that are surrounding us as well. So we need SOAR workers, people. Please help.
It's also important, I think, Sharita, you can probably talk about it better than I can, but it's important to know that when you qualify for disability as part of chronic homeless status, that disabling condition does not automatically translate into you would qualify for a disability payment by Social Security. There's a huge difference between the two. A disabling condition to enter a PSH program is not the same level of criteria of receiving SSDI.
That's correct.
And Sharita can talk probably a little bit better about it than I can, but essentially if you qualify for SSDI, you're unable to do any type of work. So
that's actually SSI. With SSI, because it's a set amount and it's means tested. If you go to work, you I think it's like for every dollar they count 50 cents. And so if you get to a point where you're making more than the check, of course, then they say that you're not disabled. So you run the risk of potentially losing your benefits. Now, if you're getting SSDI, which is the benefit where you've paid into the system and you're entitled, you can work without penalty. And so for our folks who are SSI recipients, they have to be really careful about how they go to work and when they go to work. Social Security does have programs that they can do, like the Ticket to Work program that gives them a certain amount of test time without messing with their benefits. It's something I think us as a continuum, we really need to work specifically on helping our folks do that, because, you know, disability is still, you know, SSI is not a lot of money. It's $841 a month. We know that's not enough money. And so we can get our folks to a point where we have gotten their disabling conditions to a manageable level, they can have some semblance of an employee life in a meaningful way that may not impact their benefits, but also give them, you know, something to do and something to look forward to in their days. So we need to do a lot of work on that.
Yeah. All right. Other questions from the group? Any more thoughts on data? Or any thoughts on the NOFO application in general?
So the only thing I can think of, Colin, is I hope to know more after the data centers training on data engagement, which isn't scheduled until October 4th, which I know is like running so close to the due date for this application, but it's hard for me to speculate without knowing what they're going to reveal during that time.
Sure, I think that's a fair point, Ricky. I think, I think if we can, we know that we're planning to use HMIS. We know that we're going to try to see what kind of reports we can pull to help us maybe better target resources would be the overall goal, is kind of what I'm thinking, hearing. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
And then help us to be able to sort of set some performance benchmarks or overall system goals that, hey, after doing this for a year, we find that it's taking us 180 days to get people from first date of contact through the engagement and exited. Maybe we can aim to get that down to 150 days and 120 days and, eventually find ways to get us down. But of course, we are talking about some of the most difficult to serve with some of the most severe mental health and substance abuse issues, which contribute to paranoia and folks not wanting to share data and information. And that's what makes some of this work even more challenging. So I think it is important to recognize that we are dealing with some percentage of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness that are extremely high barrier and extremely difficult to engage with. And, especially when you overlay that with criminal justice involvement and in and out of, jails, makes it harder to stay engaged with people when they're in and out of the justice system.
Would it be worthwhile? And I know this has nothing to do with data, but, since we did mention, and I think Lee mentioned it earlier as well, like we've got this, I don't even want to call it a bottleneck. I'm just going to call this like stoppage, right? Of landlords not that jazzed about working with the folks that we're trying to serve. Would it be worthwhile to talk about the city's commitment to landlord engagement?
I mean, that's part of that's part of the application, is the landlord engagement piece, and that the city is, going to be entering into a contract for recommending a contract to city council to approve for landlord engagement.
But that doesn't help with this data question, I guess.
It may or may not. That's a good thought. Let me think about it, because there may be some data points of increasing landlords or something like that that might be able to be tied with it.
Okay.
But there is a whole separate section in this NOFO, if I remember correctly, about landlord engagement that we have to talk about. All right, other thoughts, questions, concerns? If not, I would say we can probably end a little early. You can have a little bit more time back in your lives if you'd like. All right.
Okay.
We're done.
I was going to say,
hearing none, going once, going twice. Have a great
Thanks,
day,
Colin.
a wonderful weekend, everyone.
appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye.